Joining me now from Capitol Hill, two of the newer members of the U.S. Senate, Democrat Mark Warner of Virginia, Republican John Barrasso of Wyoming. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Thanks very much for joining us here on Money and Politics. And Senator Barrasso, you've got seniority, so I'm going to go to you first. How far apart are Democrats and Republicans on this?
Well, thank you, Peter. We still have a long way to go. As a Republican, I think this is the most costly bill in the history of the United States. It really isn't aimed in the way that I think it should be, and it's something that's timely and temporary and targeted. I'm looking for projects like roads and highways and bridges, but there's less money in this bill for roads and highways and bridges than there is for food stamps and for extending unemployment benefits. You look at the spending, and this looks to me like a big package of pent-up demand from Democrats wanting to spend money, and we ought to debate those bills, those ideas independently. This is not the way to do it to stimulate the economy. We need to look at ways to fix housing first, and then to make sure that we're not spending money that shouldn't be spent. $600 million for new cars for government workers, sending money to the Philippines to Filipino World War II veterans. How is that going to help stimulate the American economy?
Senator Warner, it sounds like there's still a long way between the Democratic package and Senator Barrasso. How close do you think people are? Do you think you can bridge these differences?
Well, listen, as one of the new guys on the block, I'm interested in not so much what's Democrat or Republican, but what's in the best interest of the country? What's going to get folks back to work? One of the concerns I have is, I think as the president outlined, we've got to act. If we delay and debate and go on and back and forth, we could end up missing the whole construction season in many of the northern states because the money wouldn't get out on road projects to actually be put to use this summer. I do think there are ways that the plan can be strengthened. I'm particularly interested in focusing on job creation, which is absolutely critical. I want to make sure that those funds that go back to states, and as a former governor, a governor of a state that kept its AAA bond rating, I want to make sure states get some assistance, but I also think that states should use their rainy day funds. States should not be rewarded for bad past fiscal behavior. So trying to make sure that some of these dollars are tied to actually the states stepping up and making some hard choices as well is something that I'm going to be looking at.
Senator Warner, I know you and other Democrats, there's probably aspects of this bill that you don't like. You're willing to accept some changes here, or is this a perfect piece of legislation? What would you change if you could?
Well, listen, as somebody who's used to being a governor and just recently a newly born legislator, I'm used to, there's always ways I think you can improve a piece of legislation. And I do think there'll be efforts to work with folks like Senator Barrasso and others to make sure that we get more of these funds out quicker into the economy, targeted on jobs, making sure that we're not creating long-term obligations, because the economy will recover, but we don't want to be stuck with a lot of long-term out-year commitments that we might not be able to afford in terms of the deficit.
Senator Barrasso, how far are Republicans willing to take this fight? We heard the president again today call for swift action. The economy is in recession. Are you willing to stand in the way of some sort of stimulus package, given what's going on in the economy right now?
I want something that I can vote for, but you and I both know that the engine that drives this economy is small business all across this great country. And I think we need to do the sort of things that encourage small business through tax cuts. So I want to look for something that I can vote for, but to me it's going to have to be something that I believe is going to stimulate the economy and not just deal with a pent-up demand to spend money.
You talked about housing. Senator McConnell mentioned that as well. He even talked about this idea that's been tossed around here in Washington, also on Wall Street, about perhaps having the government back up 4% mortgages for people through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Is that an idea that you think is worthy of consideration? Is that what you'd like to see in this legislation?
Well, certainly we have to fix housing first. That's what got us into this problem. And if you can set up a way for 30-year mortgages for people who are and get it at 4 or 4.5%, you can allow the average homeowner who qualifies to refinance to save thousands of dollars every year. Plus, for first-time homeowners, a $15,000 tax credit, I think, is a good way to go. That will stimulate the economy.
Senator Warner, are Democrats open to including housing in here? It was Democrats who were calling for more help for housing when President Bush was in office. I can't believe you all are that far apart with the Republicans on this issue.
No, I think there's a great interest in focusing on housing. Matter of fact, the administration had indicated that $80 to $100 billion of the second round of the so-called TARP funds were going to be used for housing. The sooner we get some of those plans out, the better. I'm interested in the approach around that 4 or 4.5%. I am interested in the costs, though, and I am interested in making sure that if we were going to try to lower those interest rates, it was, again, very targeted targeted. I think you can look all around the world when you see governments try to intervene for too long in the credit markets, it ends up causing havoc. So let's look at what that cost would be. Let's look at how we can also jumpstart housing. But we've got to remember, we've got an oversupply in the housing market at this point. Some of that is just going to have to be absorbed. So I do hope that if we were looking at stimulating the housing market, we wouldn't just look at first-time buyers, but we'd also look at people who are actually repurchasing another home, because we've got to make sure that on the first-time buyers we perhaps tighten up some of these rules, because one of the reasons we're in the spot we're in is there were folks who got into homes that were way above their heads.
Senator Barrasso, Senator Warner mentioned the TARP funding, the next $350 billion coming down the road. There are a lot of people in the financial community say, listen, the primary focus here for Congress shouldn't just be stimulus. It should be dealing with the financial crisis, perhaps even more help to banks, despite the criticism of the TARP funds to date. Are you worried that maybe that should be the priority here? Should we be doing more for the financial sector instead of this stimulus package?
You know, I voted against the bailout. I thought it was rushed. I thought there wasn't the sort of accountability and oversight and transparency that the people of America should have had. So I don't think that first amount was used properly. I voted against this second release. When we take a look at jobs, when you're talking about a $900 billion proposal right here for a stimulus, and it's dealing with 3 million jobs, that's $300,000 per every job saved or every job created. That's a very expensive job. I say let the tax breaks go to the small businesses which know how to create jobs in America.
Senator Warner, are you worried about the price tag down the road if you've got a $900 billion stimulus package and more bills to come in terms of saving the financial sector? Some people say maybe another $1 trillion from the government to help the banks.
Listen, Peter, as somebody who kept Virginia's AAA bond rating, actually dealt straight up with our financial problems, I'm very worried about out-year commitments. But I'd also recognize that, you know, we're looking at part of this is assistance to states. States are going to be looking at, over the next 2.5 to 3 fiscal years, about a $300 billion shortfall as well. So some of these dollars, in terms of those folks who've lost their job, making sure they've got unemployment, making sure that there is some availability for assistance in terms of food stamps, making sure that there's still adequate dollars on Medicaid. A number of states have already run out, for example, of their unemployment funds. Some of that assistance is going to be necessary. It needs to be targeted. It needs to be short-term. And I do believe that we ought to look long and hard before we make any of these commitments in the out years.
All right. Well, you've got some big votes to come for both of you on this package. Senator Warner, Senator Barrasso, thanks to both of you for being here on Money in Politics. Look forward to having you back on soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.